Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our clinic this afternoon with Nikon School. My name is Neil Freeman from Nikon School. We are delighted to have Donna Cruz with us. Donna is one of our ambassadors. She is an amazing food photographer. So if you've got any questions about creating professional looking images in your own home with regard to food photography, please place them in the chat. And what we will do is we will try and answer over the next sort of 40 minutes or so. We'll try and answer those questions as much as we can. So put your questions in the chat there. And first up, I'm going to hand over to Donna and say, why food?
Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, Neil. Thank you for presenting as well. Why food? Well, I mean, food is a primal thing that we have. I mean, since man has been on earth, we've been obsessed with food. I mean, it's not just about fuel, it's about there's so many other aspects to food. So yeah, I think as human beings, we have this really close connection to food, and it's part of our heritage, it's part of our identities, it's comfort, it's memories, it's nostalgia. And why not portray that through images, through beautiful artwork and through beautiful pictures, and get that story across through food photography. I mean, there are, getting into food photography on the food side, there are so many different aspects to food photography. So it's not just about taking a picture of your plate and posting a picture on Instagram, which I'll have you know, if you ask a lot of my family, they probably think that that's what I do, you know, like my dad and those kind of family members, they hear food photographer and they think it's someone who takes a picture of an empty plate. But yeah, there's just so many more aspects to food photography. I mean, there's product photography, there's books, there's cookery books, there's restaurant photography, there's lifestyle, there's art, there's so many different aspects to food photography. So it's not just a matter of photographing a plate of food.
Talk us through, so we're talking here about creating professional looking images in your own home. Talk us through, I can see your sort of, we've got a tripod in the background there, I can see your sort of setup. Talk us through your, because you work from home effectively, don't you?
Yeah, I do. So, I mean, there's pros and cons to working from home. Yeah, I have this is my studio behind me. My kitchen is in front of me, so I'm very closely connected to the kitchen. I've obviously got to be able to move food backwards and forwards. And I mean, it works. It's great for me. I get to go to work in my slippers and my tracky bottoms some days, and other days, you know, I don't have to leave the house unless I have to go food shopping. So I do have that as an advantage from working from home. And obviously during COVID and that, I've been able to continue as normal because I work primarily on my own. I've been able to continue as normal as if sort of things have been normal on the work front. A few things, I do need to have a really big fridge, a big fridge. I don't know if that's a pro or a con of working from home. And then I think some of the other things, like maybe if I have to take a creative break. So when I'm working from home, I always have access to the studio and I always have access to work. So I have to force myself to sit back, and over Saturdays and Sundays and over during the public holidays and that sort of thing, I have to take a break. I've got to take a creative break. Otherwise, I can end up on this hamster wheel of working all the time. And I think that just comes with working from home in general. You have to learn to shut off, and you have to learn to take time away from what you're doing, especially on the creative side, to be able to take a bit of a creative break. So yeah, so there's pros and cons from working from home from a studio, but I love it. I get to spend time with my family. I get to spend time with my kids. And then if I'm working with clients, a lot of the time I can either send them a picture of what the image is going to look like. We'll have a really good discussion about the images. So I don't necessarily need to have the client in my studio. A lot of that can be done online these days. So I think the old days of having to have a full studio set up where you have to have the client come in to see you. Obviously, it still happens on a very big commercial level, but there are ways around it now, being able to work from home.
So you talked about using the word studio there. When I think a lot of people think about studio, they think of huge spaces, lots of lighting, tons of gear. Talk us through your setup, because I've seen what your studio setup, and I've seen what you can create just on a very small table space. So just talk us through your studio setup, what you actually use.
Well, I mean, that's the beautiful thing about food photography, is that you actually can't really get a concept of the size of the area that is being shot in. So a lot of people can become food photographers in a very small area in their house. I'm fortunate, I do have a studio, I do have space, but a lot of it is actually more for storage than anything else, because not only does it, do we have to worry about photography gear, over and above that, I've still got backgrounds and I've got props and I've got everything else that goes with food photography. And it's kind of like having a baby. You don't realize how much gear goes with having a baby when you're trying to travel, and it's only when you're trying to pack the boot you realize how much stuff you have. And that's the same with food photography. You don't realize how much stuff you actually need for food photography. So I think the biggest issue is actually storage. But I mean, in my studio, I mean, I've backgrounds, props, all the styling equipment. But I have seen it done in other homes where people have done incredible images. And I know that I've seen it being done over the bath. So people have put a board over a bath and shot in their bathroom. I've seen other people who've used their ironing board as a table. So an ironing board, which is great for adjusting up and down, that can be used as an adjustable table. So there's so many different ways of doing it from home. You don't need a fully rigged studio, with the whole lighting and the whole blinds and gears and all of that. You can create a little corner or a little pocket in your house. If you're lucky and you do have a spare room, that's great. But yeah, I've seen a lot of people just create a little corner in their house and turn that into a little studio. Unfortunately, your family have to live with that, but that's what happens. That's one of the things, and sometimes it gets a bit messy. Lots of food.
The upside of that for the family, though, is they've got great food, because I know you cook your own food as well before you photograph it. Surely they get to eat all that, so that's got to be a bonus.
That's exactly it. And they get to try all the samples, and they get to fiddle around and play around and taste everything. So yeah, there are definitely pros for the family when it comes to that.
Talk about the gear you use. So what would you say is sort of a great starting setup? Camera body and lens, and then lighting. Talk us through because you use a mix of natural light, artificial light, but talk us through the gear you use. Let's start talking cameras and lenses and then move on to lighting.
Okay. I obviously shoot with a full frame camera. So I have a Z6. I'm playing around with a Z6 II at the moment. I'm fortunate that I'm with Nikon, so I do have access to some incredible cameras. So I have the D850, and then I'm going to start to play around with the new Z7 II as well. So I'm really excited to get playing with that. I do also shoot with the Z7, the standard Z7 at the moment as well. Over and above that, I have a 50mm lens, f1.8. You don't need anything smaller than a f1.8. You don't need to go into the f1.4, definitely not for food photography. My favorite go-to lens is the 85mm. It's beautiful for food portraiture. Then I have the 105 macro if I'm shooting on the Z series, and I'll use the FTZ adapter. And then I have the 2470, which I will use if I'm going, particularly, I don't really use it that often in the studio, but I'll use that more on location shoots. So if I'm going into restaurants, then I can avoid having too many lenses out and about and changing too often. So yeah, but I would say if anybody's interested in starting, the first option is to go for the 50mm, for a 50mm. And that obviously is on that's on a full frame camera. So what would that be? A 35mm on a crop sensor?
Would be just over 52.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, that's again, that's a great place to start if you're on a crop sensor as well. So I made the change from D850 to Z7 to Z7 II now, loving it. What have you noticed about the mirrorless? Smaller, lighter, sharper lenses? Maybe those are the key things I saw.
Definitely all of those. For me, I think initially the appeal to me was having a smaller body and a lighter body. Even though I'm still in a studio environment, and even though I shoot a lot on tripod, I'm still moving around a lot. I'm still playing with my camera, picking it up, moving it around, and obviously moving all my other gear around gets really heavy. So I was really drawn to the Z series because they're so small and compact. But I have to say, I love the electronic viewfinder. That for me is an absolute game changer. So to be able to dial in my camera setting changes and be able to see it live in the viewfinder is absolutely key for me at the moment. I really love that. And then what I didn't realize when I actually got it was the extra focal points that I got with it. So having so many more focal points than on the D850 it's something I didn't realize I needed until I've got it. So until I found it. No,
it often works out that way. Let's talk about lighting, and then we'll go on to backdrops. And you've got some, I know you're going to share, you've got some great behind the scenes stuff as well we can look at as well. So let's have a quick chat about lighting, natural light versus sort of artificial lighting, sort of talk through what you use.
Well, I consider myself to be a bit of a hybrid. So I use natural and artificial at the same time. Not all the time, but I'll always use natural. And then probably about 85% of the time, I will use artificial light as well as full lighting onto my subjects, just to channel an extra dose of light into a specific area. So I'll use a rotor light for that, because the thing about the rotor light is that you can change the Kelvin setting. So you can adjust your white balance, or you can just use it as an extra boost for whatever your natural light. So I love that. I love that if I'm using a motion shot, if I need to get extra light into a specific area. So say, for instance, I'm doing a steam shot, which we'll talk about later. You really want to get extra light into that particular area. That's when I bring out the artificial light and I boost that into the scene. But yeah, I mean, I've shot for many years with natural light. And again, shooting from home, you don't need to have the full lighting setup. You need to find yourself a really nice window that you can get beautiful light in. And you just need the one window because you need directional light. You don't need windows all around. You need one window where you can get beautiful light in from one direction, and that's all you need to work with. So I'll go into, do you want me just to show you some examples of lighting?
I was going to say, we've got a great question coming from Dave. He said, what backgrounds do you use and what sizes? And I think that's a brilliant segue into you sharing your screen to talk about lighting and backgrounds.
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to take you into Lightroom. Can you see my Lightroom?
We can see your Lightroom.
Okay. So what I want to do is I want to show you these two egg pictures, my famous egg pictures. I think these actually ended up on the Create Your Light campaign for Nikon. So this is an example of how you set your lighting up for food photography. So when you're shooting a human being, when you're shooting a person, for instance, you want them to look you want their skin to look smooth and flawless and all of that. When we're shooting food, we want to show all the textures and the bumps and the shapes and everything that come with it. So we change our direction of lighting. So we bring it in from one side. So on the left-hand side is my egg that has been shot with light coming straight on. On the right-hand side, the right-hand picture is the light coming in from the right. We've got tonal variation across the egg, and then we end with a shadow, which is exactly what we're looking for when we're doing food photography. I'll show you another example of, and I find that a lot of people always try and remove their shadows, particularly photographers. I think it's a trick that photographers try and do, is to remove shadow. And with food, we want that shadow. If you look at this, the clementine on the left, that is with the light coming straight on, so there's no shadow. So it almost looks like the clementine has been photoshopped onto the background. Whereas if you can see the shadow on the left, on the right-hand side, that actually grounds your clementine. You can see the dimples in the skin, and you can see that it actually gives a little bit extra light and life. So always try and include the shadows. Don't try and bump them away. Don't try and push them away. Yes, bring in whiteboards if your shadows are really harsh, but otherwise just play with the shadows and have fun. Getting into the background question that you were asking me about. Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of backgrounds. My studio is chaos. Let me show you a picture here of just what my studio is. And you can see on the right-hand side, I have a selection of different backgrounds. I buy wooden planks. I have painted backboards. I use vinyl backgrounds. I probably have about 50 or 60 different backgrounds. So yeah, I mean, the one that I was shooting for that particular picture were scaffolding planks that I bought from the timber yard, and I just got them to cut them up to the required size, and that's what I was shooting off. I'll see if I can find you the end result picture. That's how it looked. That was the final, that's how the scaffolding planks looked in the final image. So always just keep looking for backgrounds. You can buy online backgrounds. There's a number of different online companies that do sell printed backgrounds or handmade, hand-painted backgrounds, all sorts of different ones. But you don't necessarily have to spend a fortune buying them. You can go to timber yards, you can go to the dump, to the tip. Yeah, some of the best backgrounds I've seen from other photographers have been found lying on the side of the road and at a tip somewhere. So yeah, no particular size for backgrounds, just whatever you can pick up and carry.
I think it's a great example. That cake looks very, very nice as well. Jerry's asked a question here, and this comes straight into this. For top-down pictures like this, do you find do you need any more than a 50mm lens, or do you just generally move your camera higher if you only had that lens on?
Yeah, I'll adjust the scene, or I'll generally just move the camera higher. I mean, you really do become this master of everything when you start working from home and start doing your own rigs. And yeah, I mean, if you have to lift your tripod and put it onto boxes, then you can do that. Yeah, you just become as creative as possible. Stand on the dining room table and hang over the edge of the dining room table. Do whatever you can to get the right position.
We got another question coming. Just if you jump back to your behind the scenes there, somebody's Jeanette has asked, what's the best tripod for flat lay photography? I know you use a Manfrotto, don't you?
I use a Manfrotto, so I'll show you this picture. So I use a Manfrotto, it's the 055, and then I've just got the adjustable head. What is absolutely crucial for overhead photography is to make sure that you have a spirit level. So I have the spirit level that I clip into the hotspot of my camera, and this I can see at any angle what's happening with my alignment. It's absolutely crucial with an overhead shot, particularly to make sure that your camera is aligned horizontally and vertically. Because once you're taking the picture, when you're looking at it, if it's not aligned, it can feel like the food's slipping either forward, wherever the camera's positioned. So you've got to be really careful to make sure that lines are straight vertically and horizontally when it's locked into the tripod.
That's got a center column that comes up and then drops flat on it on that particular one. It doesn't it on the 055. That's a really good tripod. I used to use one of those. Yeah,
that's a really quick. You can press a button at the bottom and pull it up and rig it through quite easily. So when you're going from overhead to straight on, it's quick and easy to move around. You can get the ones where you screw out and then you screw it back in, but that can take a while, particularly when you're in the action and in the game. You sort of got to sit and start unscrewing things. It gets a bit tedious.
Yeah. Looking at that, so you're shooting in a home studio. Do you shoot tethered?
I don't. I'm an organic shooter. I call myself an organic shooter, and I know I'm going to get a whole bunch of messages after this on my Instagram saying you've got to try shooting tethered, and I always get these suggestions. I generally like to shoot straight out of the camera. So a lot of my shots are actually straight on, and I like to view everything through the viewfinder. So I call myself a bit of an organic shooter. But that being said, there are times when I do have to, if I'm working with a client or I have to have a live view that's bigger than what I'm looking at, I will use SnapBridge because I have Wi-Fi compatibility with my cameras. I download Wi-Fi. SnapBridge is the Nikon app for to control a device, to control your camera from a device. So I download it I have my iPad, and then I can control everything from my iPad, and I can see the live view. I can change my aperture, I can change my shutter speed, I can change my ISO, I can change everything from the iPad, and I have full control from that. So I will use that if I'm in a position where I'm in front of the camera or I'm working with somebody else and we need to have an idea of what's happening in terms of the styling. That's when I'll use it. But generally when I'm on my own, I'll just shoot straight through the viewfinder.
When you've got your pictures down, I know we're viewing them in Lightroom here. What do you use for editing? Is it Lightroom, Photoshop?
I use Lightroom. I very seldom use Photoshop because I'll use Photoshop if I'm doing things like focus stacking or I need to put composites together, which I very seldom do. But if I do need to, then I'll go into Photoshop. Or if I need to, there's something that's really wrong that has to be removed. But generally for me, it's Lightroom. I try and get it as close to possible in camera and then just a quick edit through Lightroom.
Ian's asked a really great question. He said, how do you deal with specular highlights on objects like clementine? So those specular highlights, those white areas which are very, very bright. How do you generally tend to deal with those?
I don't have a problem with specular highlights. I know that in the food photography world, particularly when it comes to reflections on glass and that sort of thing, a lot of people really try and push away the highlights. I like highlights, I really do, because I think that they do add life to your images. If it's really bad, I mean, generally because I shoot in RAW, I can adjust that quite easily in Lightroom, so it's not generally a problem. And often I'll shoot a range of different settings so that I might underexpose it or I might overexpose it so that I can see once I'm actually in the editing stage which one I prefer. So generally, I don't have a problem with it. And if I do have a specular highlight, if it's glaringly obvious, then I'll fix it, or I'll reshoot, or I'll change the angle of the camera, or I'll change the angle of whatever I'm shooting so that highlight is in a different position. But I don't normally have a problem with highlights, and especially reflections.
Yeah, I think though some people can, I find this where I do a lot of, I shoot all types of photography, and I find certainly when we talk to a lot of people, we can overthink this, and that starts to get you too technical, and you forget actually you don't have to necessarily get that perfect with it. You don't have to worry about all those little technical bits all the time. As long as it's sharp, in focus, and you capture the creative intent with the light, I think that they're more important on that side. Chris asked a question there about what tripod and head works best for still life. It is a personal question, personal preference. Donna's using the Manfrotto 5.5. I'd see you've got a geared head on there.
Yeah.
I can't get on with geared heads myself. I use a ball head, and I've tried all types of head. It's very personal preference. The best thing you can do, Chris, is go and try. All of them would work. There's just one you are going to get on better with.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
It's personal preference. Do you find that, Donna?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I've got a ball head on one. I've got a number of tripods. This is the main one that I use. But I just, as I've upgraded, I haven't got rid of the old ones. And so I just kind of just carry on with the new one and go back to the old one, and I play between the two. So I don't really have any particulars that I would recommend. It's not. Yeah, I just kind of get on with it.
I've got a question coming here about shooting yourself in your image. If you've got something on the plate and you want to put your hand coming in and then move it out, how would you go about shooting that? I know I'd probably manually focus on the plate, have a fast enough shutter speed to freeze the action, and just trigger it remotely. It's a fairly simple setup, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I'm actually talking about this tomorrow on the photography show as well, and I show a demonstration of how I set up my camera. I set my camera to timer. If I want to be in the picture, I'll put my camera on a tripod, set my camera to timer, and I've adjusted my timer settings so that it takes 15 images per shot per set. So then I'll set my camera onto a focus point, onto an anchor point that's solid. So nothing that's going to be moving that I'm going to have to try and track. So it's on a solid point. So say, for instance, it's on a cake, it's on a part of the cake that we're going to look at first and that we want to draw attention to. So I set my camera, my focal point onto that, start the timer, and then I can go around. It gives you a couple of seconds to get in front of the camera, and it gives you a chance to pour. And then you do the pouring shot where you're getting 15, where your camera will take 15. Mine takes 15. You can do 10, you can do however many. And then I've got 15 chances of getting that shot in one hit. And that's really how I do it. Yes, otherwise you could do it with a remote. You could do it through an app or a remote.
Yeah. Again, if you use the self-timer feature on things like D850, Z6, something like that. If you go into the self-timer settings in the custom settings menu, where it's got self-timer, as Donna says, you can set it to shoot 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pictures, depending on the camera you've got. You have a half a second or a second in between each picture as well. So you've got multiple opportunities to get that shot. It's a really great way of shooting.
Yeah, and it's so quick and easy. It really is.
Maggie's asked, any tips for shooting bottles?
Bottles, yeah, they're always a problem because they do show a lot of reflection. So I think it's just making sure that you get the right angle, you get the right, you position your camera correctly, you position the bottles correctly. If you are getting a lot of highlights that are or reflections that are showing, particularly for me, reflections are an issue when they start showing the outside world in your picture. So when you can see somebody in a reflection, or you can see a tree from the garden in a reflection, that's where I start to try and play and change those reflections. Yeah, then you just got to get diffuser screens. You've got to get black cards to try and bounce the reflections. Bottles are a beast on their own. I try and avoid them as much as possible.
Another way for killing reflections is potentially using a polarizer as well. Yeah. Could use a polarizer filter. So again, like the previous shot there, there's multiple ways of approaching this. There's no one definitive way, like in most genres of photography. Andrew's asked about what direction does Donna's natural light come from? Is it north window or is it south window? The answer to that is it depends on the weather outside, doesn't it?
Depends on the time of the year, it depends on the weather, it depends on the time of the day. I have windows all over which I use. In fact, I want to show you this. I actually even did a shoot in my, where is my picture gone? There's my picture. That's the one. That's the other. And that was in my bedroom because that was where the best light was. So your studio can be anywhere. It's where the light is. So yeah, it doesn't have to be which is the best window, which direction the light's coming from. It's where you get the best light. And if you take your egg in the egg cup around the house and you try and look for those shadows and midtones and highlights like I showed you in that image, that is the best window to shoot next to. I'll move my bedroom picture there. Yeah. At least my bed was made.
Yeah. Well, I think that works great. And that is a brilliant answer to that question, because I'm here looking out my broadcast studio window or my dining room, and it's flat grey. This side is flat grey out the back of the house. I could use any window in the house today. Yesterday, if I shot in the front, it was completely different to the back due to the time of the day. I had bright light coming in and then dark at the back. So look at the light. It's not a specific setting. It's about the light you've got on that day.
And play around with it.
Yeah, Nick's asked a great question here, and I love your look on your sort of atmospheric food photography. Nick's asked, do you edit your photos massively, or is everything lighting-wise done beforehand?
I try and get it as close to possible in camera, and then I'll edit in Lightroom afterwards, and that really creates the mood and a consistent look across all of my images. So I feel that your personal style a lot of the time actually comes through your editing. But generally, in terms of the color of the food that I'm shooting, I will always try and keep that as natural as possible. The rest of the kind of style and the theme comes from props and editing, bringing in a little bit of vignetting, bit of contrast, bit of clarity on some of the wood things, and but actually the steam shot, which I really wanted to talk about because I've had so many questions about how to do steam. So I just want to go into, this is the steam shot that I posted the other day, and I've had people emailing me from New Zealand all over the place wanting to know how to do steam, because there's a lot of interest in steam. So it's incense. It's an incense behind the cup of steam. So this is my setup. This is the behind the scenes, right? So it's that window that we're looking at behind me. And then I've got my board, I've got my camera in front, I've got the 105 macro on it. And then behind my cup of hot chocolate is a little plate, it's a little disc that has an incense cone. Now this is the secret. It's not an incense stick, it's an incense cone, all right? Because at the end, it's got a little hole. So when you light one side, you start to get incense coming out the other side. And if you light it immediately, you're going to get a thin line, a thin sort of streak of smoke, or what's the word I'm looking for? You know what I mean? But if you leave it for a couple of minutes and you give it a good burn, it starts to really create a lot of steam. So you need to decide you need to analyze what you're shooting, and then decide how you want that steam to look, whether you want a massive steam, whether you want a small trail of steam or smoke, or whether you want sort of more controlled. And then from there, it's about fanning, it's about controlling you can see that's an overhead picture of the incense. So it's about controlling that smoke so that it looks natural. That's just another behind the scenes. You can see it really starts to get quite strong and quite overpowering. You've got to sometimes open windows. You'll gas everybody else in the house. So this was my image unedited. So going back to the editing question, this was my image unedited. Now that's a lot of steam for a cup of hot chocolate. So you have to really chisel down and try and get it as realistic as possible. Once I edited it, I dropped some of that smoke, I darkened it a little bit, and I made it look more natural so that it looked like steam. So really, that is a difference in my editing. That's what I would do.
I think that shows that's a brilliant example there of sort of going through the shooting process. Cameron has asked a great question here about what made you get started with a macro lens for your food photography, and can you show some images with your macro lens, which you've just done? Fantastic. But what made you choose a macro lens?
I was shooting with a 50mm, and I'd read that the 105 macro is kind of the lens that a lot of food photographers use. And I was fortunate enough, because my husband is a photographer, he just happened to have one. And I was like, oh my word. I mean, most people have to save up and really invest in it. And I was so fortunate that he actually had one, because I'd mentioned it that I wanted to get a macro lens. And he said, oh, well, I've got the 105, give it a go. And I love it particularly because you can do macro photography. So you can get in really close and photograph stuff close up and photograph your food close up. But you can also pull it far back and get a beautiful pullback image. And what I love about it is that it compresses your image and it pulls everything together. It gives you that beautiful bokeh in the background. It gives you your soft, your depth of field, but it really brings your hero, which in this case would be the cup, to life and brings it nice and close to you. So, but you do need to have quite a bit of space to work with. You do need to be able to stand far back to be able to work in a controlled environment like that. So it's not for everybody. If you're working in a tight space, then you would have to use it as a macro lens.
Laura's asked a question about how do you get your work out there?
Okay. So it's really, I think for me, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. For me, I think I'm a bit of an online gamer, so I love playing games like World of Warcraft and that sort of thing. And for me, it's about it. I think from that I've learned this the joy of leveling up. So you create a goal and you get to one level, and then you master that level, and then you go up to the next level. So I think it's really important, if you're looking at going into business, to make sure that you've covered a lot of bases to get to that point. So you are relying on you at a point where your composition is good, your styling is good, and clients are willing to pay for it. It's not clients that want free work. It's not clients that want to send you a sample and get a free image out of it. It's clients that are willing to pay for it and are prepared to invest in your photography. So yeah, you've got to be very careful of the tipping point, when to go into business, when clients are prepared to pay for it. Your family and friends will always tell you that your work is amazing. So it's when you reach that point where clients are contacting you saying, I want to pay for work I want to pay for you to do this for me, and they're prepared to take your work as it is. So yeah, for me, it started with a couple of small goals. So going back to my kind of leveling up, I started, my first goal was to get my images accepted for a website called Food Gawker. So if anybody's a blogger, Food Gawker is a great platform. It's almost like a Pinterest, but they're very selective about the images that they choose. So you send one anchor image, and they decide if that image is good enough to be shared on their website. What they do if they reject that image is they send you feedback back. So you always know why your image has been rejected. So that was for me, my starting point was submitting to Food Gawker, and I would get rejections, and I got a lot of rejections in the beginning. And it was sort of things like, and because it's food, it's the kind of feedback that you're looking for. So it was things like incorrect angle, out of focus, overexposed, underexposed, just really good feedback that you actually need as a food photographer. And then from there, I set other smaller goals. So once they started to accept my images on a more regular basis, then I set other goals. And it's sort of bigger accounts than, say, for instance, Instagram, that would share my work, and that I could get reposts on Instagram. That, you know, there's quite a few beautiful Instagram accounts that post other photographers' work, and to have my work shared on there was another goal. So it's really about, for me, it was setting goals and then knowing that what I was doing in the food photography world was being actually noticed. Sorry, a long answer for
I think it's a great answer. Great answer. Mia's asked a question here about, is it better to use certain textures, or is it very much dependent on the theme of the photograph you're shooting for the client?
I love textures, so I will always throw in a texture. So for me, I want my images to be I want it to touch all your senses. I want you to be able to feel it, smell it, taste it, you know, just by looking at it. So for me, everything is about textures. That's why. I suppose that's why I've got such a rustic look, because I love the old boards, the peeling paint, that sort of thing. Yeah, so very much in textures. And not only that, just actually in the food itself is showing the textures. So if there's sugar on top of a donut, it's showing that texture. You want to be able to, your viewer to feel that they're crunching into a donut if they're looking at the sugary bits on the top. So yeah, very much textures.
Joe's asked, how do you blend the background to the base? Often has joining lines. Do you have a trick when you're doing that?
I try and generally keep my background and my base a similar color. That's where the 105 macro is really great, because I can push that back in depth of field, so it's not that obvious. And then if it's really bad, then I can try and adjust it in Lightroom afterwards. Otherwise, I very seldom shoot with two contrasting colors. So I'll very seldom shoot with sort of a dark background and a light base. I like it to be, it's either all dark or all light. So yeah.
Angela's asked, can you shoot RAW when using SnapBridge? Yes, your camera set up RAW. Donna, you're not transferring it to your smart device, are you? Just using your smart device as a remote screen, aren't you?
Yeah, so I just use it as a live screen, yeah.
Yeah, so your camera's set up as you would, you're just using your tablet or your iPad as a remote viewer.
Yeah, still going onto the card. I take the card out, I import it into Lightroom as normal, but I'm just using my device as a live view.
A question here about how do you deal with shadows from the tripod and camera, perhaps? So I think that's due to sort of using the right we're back onto using the right window on the right day, aren't we?
Yep, using the right window, placing it in the right position. So if I've got my window coming in, if I've got my light coming in from a window on the right, I'll position my camera on the left-hand side. So always put my camera on the opposite side. And remember, this is actually what we cover tomorrow as well in our talk. If you have a person in that picture, they need to be on the other side of the window, because a person is actually really big. So they can block out a lot of light. So you need to be aware of where people are standing, so that they're not blocking, or you as the photographer, so you're not blocking out the light. But sometimes it actually comes in handy, because you can use it to sort of close off certain sections of light that you want to block out. So often I might, if again, going back to that question about the background, if my background is really strong and really prominent, I will go and stand and block out the background. So I'll stand in front of the lighting to stop the light shining onto the background, so the light still continues to shine onto my food, but it actually blocks the background, so it pushes the background back. So yeah, so I mean, if it's really bad, you just got to change the angle, you've got to change your position of your food or your camera.
Right, we've got just over 5 minutes left, so we've got a lot of questions still. No. So this happened to me and Rishi earlier. These are sort of, they're not like our Nikon School Talks where we can just talk forever on them. So Guy, we are talking with Donna later this evening, 5 through till 6. We got a panel discussion, myself, Rishi, Donna, and Andy. I asked the pros really, so you can ask this question. So if we don't get to your question in a second, please join us again later. And if it's a technical question, myself and Rishi are on later as well. You can talk to us as well, and we'll answer your camera questions. So going to do a quick fire round now. So Chris, that's a Manfrotto 055 and a 3-way gear head. Manfrotto. I don't know the name of that geared head.
Yeah, it's quite a long number.
Yeah, it is. Mark, how do you avoid reflections? Quickly, Donna, one sentence on avoiding reflections.
I move it to a different position.
Yeah, and again, you could use a polarizer, depending on the subject. If it's a glass bottle or something like that, you could do that. So it's about the direction there. Cameron, that 5055 is a great tripod for landscapes. That's what I used to use 3 tripods ago. So I had a Manfrotto, then I had a Gitzo, and I've now on my Photo Pro. So that 055 is a great tripod for landscapes as well as food photography. And you can move the center column out the way. I don't have a center column on my tripods now at all. Christine's asked, how do you photograph a cake and still get it all front to sharp if the cake slice isn't parallel to the camera?
Then you have to either put it onto a narrow aperture or do focus stacking. Play around with your camera and see if you can do. Nikon call it the Nikon is called focus
shift shooting.
Focus shift shooting. Yeah,
and that's available on a D780, D850, Z series cameras, and it'll automatically step through the shot for you. You still have to stack it in Photoshop, but focus shift shooting, it's in the photo shooting menu on the camera. Jeanette's asked, do you prefer a specific time of day to shoot?
Well, I mean, obviously for me, it's when the light is the best. So generally, depending on the time of the year, at the moment, it's probably, I mean, this morning I was actually shooting at 8:30. So, but generally around about 10 to sort of 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that's kind of shooting time for me.
How do you deal with cooking your own food and shooting?
Yeah, it's a bit of a juggle. You do have a lot of balls in the air at once. I do it, but for big shoots, I will, depending on my time frame, I'll use a home economist. I've got a home economist who lives around the corner from me, and she's amazing. She comes in, she does all the prep, everything. She does all the cooking, cleans my kitchen, has everything, has all my herbs chopped up beautifully for me, and she just comes in and we can shoot directly from there. With COVID, she just pops it in a boot, cooks it at home, pops it in a boot, brings it around to me and leaves it on my front door. So we do have options, but generally, yeah, I mean, I like cookbooks and that, I've done all my own shooting and my own cooking.
Cameron's asked, when using textures, are there any color combinations that work to avoid reflections?
When using textures, no, I don't think so. I mean, I don't really understand the question. Textures in the food or textures in the background?
So what textures do you lay food on to avoid sort of, is it worth avoiding strong colors? So it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, I generally avoid the oranges, the pines and that sort of thing. Anything that's really sort of glossed and shiny. So definitely look for something matte. I prefer natural wood because I don't get reflections from that. So natural wood that's not varnished. So I don't get reflections from that. And again, if you do get a little bit of a reflection, use it to your advantage. Like really, I'll play that up so that, because I love reflections. And I love it when, especially if I get a color cast from, say, for instance, I've got a glass of wine and there's light coming through it and it's shining and there's a reflection shining onto the wood. That's amazing. Don't try and block that out. Don't get scared of that. So yeah, use it to your advantage if you can.
Sally's asked, do you know how the pics will come out, or do they just emerge during your shoot, or do you have a final shoot in mind?
If I'm doing a client shoot, I have a final shoot in mind. I don't particularly use a mood board because my mind is just too chaotic for that. I have tried them and it ends up nothing like the mood board. So, but I do normally have an idea of what the color of the food is going to be, the color of the props will be, and the color of the background will be. And then it just emerges from there. And my portfolio shots can take anywhere from 5 minutes to 3 hours, but a client shoot will can take 10 minutes to half an hour. and that kind of is more controlled. So it's more, I know exactly what I'm doing. When it's my portfolio shots, I'll play around. I just move things around, tweak here, tweak there, change props, put in props, yeah, and just play with my food.
Do you, talking about props, do you have a favorite prop?
Yeah, my wooden crate.
Wooden crates.
It's in everything.
Terry, Donna doesn't use speed lights. She's using rotor lights, LED lighting. So they're continuous light sources.
Continuous
You're not
light,
using. Yeah. I taught you speed lights, didn't I? But yeah, sort of.
Yeah. I like continuous because I like to be able to see my shadows. For me, it's really important to see what's happening with my shadows. So I'll keep continuous light on so that I can see through my camera, when I can look through my camera and I can see exactly what's happening with my lights and my darks.
Yeah. Jason said it's a ribbon of smoke. That is spot on, Jason.
That's what it is.
Of smoke is a great way of describing it. Emma said, do you have any tips for dealing with white balance questions, white balance problems in mixed lighting?
Use a gray card. I like to use a gray card or a piece of gray fabric. But otherwise, if you find that your white balance is always the same, if say for instance you're getting a reflection off your internal walls, they're a different color, try and use that to your advantage. You know, I think we can be so set on having everything to be exactly the way the rules say it should be. My particular style started because I couldn't get my white balance correct because my walls were slightly yellow color. This is now changed to gray. But when I first started shooting, everything came out with a slight yellow tinge to it, and that's what I used, and that became my particular style. So yes, if you really want to get technical, use a gray card, but otherwise, again, use it to your advantage, break the rules and make it your particular style.
Yeah, I'd agree with that with my landscapes. I just don't, if you've got mixed lighting on the landscape, just use it to your advantage. Warm something up, cool it down.
Yeah,
it's your look as a photographer. Right, last question, guys. Aruni's asked, what is the most challenging type of food shot you've done for a client? And I'm going to say brown
food. Yeah, it was a book. It was a book using a pressure cooker, and everything came out looking the same. So everything had to, yeah, anything that comes out of a pressure cooker looks the same. So it was a whole book trying to make use different bright colored props to bring out the brown food. Yeah, brown food. Actually, it was also an air fryer. Also, it became another book, also very brown.
Okay, just quickly, question here. So yes, Donna is on Z62 and Z72 now. And what was the name of that food photo website again, Donna? You said
Food Gawker, GAWKER. For all you bloggers, it's a great website for bloggers.
Quick question: does anybody use dueling spray anymore?
No.
No. Okay, right. I think we got through most of those there. Apologies if we haven't got any to your questions there. Myself, Donna, and Rishi and Andy are on later today, later on this evening, so 5 through 6. Join us there. Myself and Rishi are on if you've got any camera questions on later today as well, talking mirrorless cameras. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you again, Donna, for giving up your afternoon to talk to us. I look forward to catching up again this evening. I hope everybody's found that useful. Thanks very much for watching, everybody, and we'll see you again on a Nikon School talk this afternoon, or check out the website, nikonschool.co.uk. We've got lots of courses on there, and we'll be getting back in as lockdown's easing to doing some food photography courses with Donna as well. So check out the website as well. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Appreciate you joining us. Bye.